Good morning, welcome to this meeting of the Accountability and Performance Meeting. I'm Jonathan Shepherd, Police and Crime Commissioner for Hertfordshire. I'm joined by Andy Profit, the Chief Constable of Hertfordshire Constabulary. Welcome to members of the public joining this meeting. This meeting helps me fulfil my statutory duty as the Police and Crime Commissioner to hold the Chief Constable to account for the work and performance of Hertfordshire Constabulary. It's webcast live to the public for transparency, and hope you find the conversations interesting. We've got 5 items on our agenda this morning. We're going to be covering live facial recognition, response times, the Online Safety Act, Victims Code of Practice, and disclosure and barring service checks in that order. So I'm going to start with live facial recognition, which is something we talked about a couple of meetings ago at the APM, ahead of the Constabulary doing a pilot of live facial recognition technology in Cheshunt just before Christmas, and so we're a little bit on from that now, and I wanted to just ask some questions around how that pilot went and the next steps for the Constabulary in terms of the use of that technology. And so perhaps, Chief, if I could start with a question around how the Constabulary evaluated that pilot and the outcomes and the learning from it.
Yes, thank you, Commissioner. Good morning. Friday the 19th of December, as you say, we tested for the first time in Hertfordshire the live facial recognition technology at the Brookfield Centre in Cheshunt. And we've learned loads from the pilot, I think is the first thing to say. So the way it works is you upload the computer with a list of people who you want to speak to because they're wanted for crimes in the local area, and the technology scans the faces, and when it gets a match, it indicates to an officer who can then go and speak to that person, check it is the right person, and take the appropriate action. So during the deployment, we had a watch list of just over 800 people that we'd uploaded, and these were people who were either wanted by Hertfordshire Constabulary for historic offending, or we wanted to arrest them for recent offending. As I say, about 800 people. A total of over 50,000 faces were scanned. The technology worked well. The slightly disappointing was we didn't get any positive hits. We did not arrest anybody of the 50,000 faces. None of them were those 800 plus people. But we satisfied ourselves that the technology can work. There's something in terms of the lessons we took away around, we probably need a slightly bigger list of people in there. You can put tens of thousands of people on this. So I think we'd build a bigger watch list next time. There are certain categories of offenders that we didn't include on that watch list that I think we would put in next time, but we would absolutely continue with the engagement that we had on this occasion with local retailers and local public, who absolutely loved to see us, thought this was a fantastic way for Hertfordshire Constabulary to do what it's here to do, catch criminals and solve crime. And interestingly, on that day when we were deployed, there were no recorded shop thefts. So lots of lessons learned. We will continue to build on this going forward, but room to do better in terms of the actual output, arresting people.
Thank you. That was useful, and so I went down on the day to have a look at the technology and talk to some of the officers there doing it, and said there was some really positive feedback from the retailers actually on the day around that presence and that operation being trialled there. Perhaps if I just ask a supplementary question on that around the lessons in terms of additional categories of people on the watch list. What would that look like in terms of types of offenders perhaps being in scope in future that weren't in scope in the pilot?
So based on our conversations with other forces who use live facial recognition technology, other forces include their registered sexual offenders on there. So maybe they're not wanted for something, but there's maybe a need that you'd want to understand how those individuals are moving, or other priority offenders who you might just want to keep kind of a close tabs on and understand why they may be in an area. So it's broadly a bigger list, but being more expansive in the types of individuals you include.
Thank you. So kind of into the territory of checking people aren't in breach of conditions and that
sort of thing. Yeah, absolutely.
Okay, thank you. That's useful. And one of the things that we touched upon pre the pilot was around the accuracy of the technology and the work being done to ensure the lowest possible risk of any kind of bias in that. Did that pilot in practice give the constabulary confidence around those issues?
Well, it did in this sense. As I've said, there were no positive marks, but equally there were no false reads. So it didn't give us any false indications of people who were on the watch list we'd created. And it's worth reiterating, there's been a significant amount of academic research into the technology, which basically says that the number of occasions that the technology will wrongly say that person there is a person who's wanted for an offence on your watch list is about 1 in 10,000. And of course there's a safeguard of we will never simply act on the technology alone, we will always then speak to that person and seek to establish the facts as an officer to an individual. And there is no statistically significant difference in the accuracy based on demographic groups.
Thank you, and I think that is quite significant, because that indication of kind of 1 to 10,000 in terms of potential false alerts from that national testing compared to 50,000 faces in Cheshunt, but no false alerts, actually suggests that real live utilisation is stronger perhaps than even kind of laboratory testing.
Yes, I think that's exactly right. And as we continue, and perhaps we'll talk about this, as we continue to test the technology and use the technology across Hertfordshire, we will continue to learn as we go and be more and more confident of the facts that we now believe in.
Thank you. In advance of the pilot, my office did quite a bit of research around what the people of Hertfordshire felt about this technology, and you referred to some of the community engagement that was done as well, and that was positive and reassuring. So over 80% of respondents were in favour of the use of live facial recognition in policing. Really significant numbers thought it was an acceptable tactic for the police to use, and very few people said that they'd kind of change whether they went into a town centre if they knew that there was going to be a deployment there. So I think significant reassurance in terms of public openness to the technology and reassurance. The key is maintaining that through the ongoing use, and so what will the constabulary be seeking to do to maintain that high level of confidence amongst the public in the use of the technology?
Well, I think, Commissioner, first of all, that survey is incredibly helpful, isn't it? And my officers echo that in terms of the feedback they're getting on the ground. They almost said that the local traders, the local businesses, the public are kind of almost jubilant to see this. They are really, really excited to see us using technology to catch criminals. But the way we're going to keep that high level of public trust and confidence is we will always pre-advertise the fact we're doing this. Where there is, in those really, really small occasions, a misread that we then correct through that interaction, we will publish details of that. So we'll be really, really open and transparent about before we come and how we did as a result of that deployment. And we're going to keep talking to community groups of all backgrounds in Hertfordshire to make sure that this technology is understood and trusted and people can come and see it working. And I think I would say to members of the public in Hertfordshire, as you see us out in the coming months and across the year, when you see us out there, come and talk to us. My officers will be happy to talk to you, explain why we're doing, because this is community policing aimed to catch criminals.
Thank you. And as you say, it's just the addition of technology to stuff that officers would be doing anyway. And certainly at Cheshunt, there were some examples of members of the public being shown the van and being kind of talked through how it worked, which was really good to see. Following that pilot, what are the constabulary's plans now in terms of the ongoing use of live facial recognition and it becoming a kind of business as usual tactic? Well,
I guess two key things to say, Commissioner. First and foremost, that the vans we use at the moment, we borrowed from our good friends in Bedfordshire, and we will be continuing to borrow their equipment. At the end of February, we'll be deploying into Watford and using the capability again. Throughout March and April, we've got plans to do deployments around the county looking at our nighttime economy, and that will coincide with Women's History Month and lots of work we're doing around violence against women and girls. So we'll be busy with the deployed capability across our town centres. As we move into the summer in June and July, of course, we've got the World Cup, so we'll look to use the technology again in the right places for that. And then throughout the rest of the summer, at large-scale events, when it's just appropriate to do so, home football fixtures for Watford, through shoplifting kind of shopping centre kind of hotspots. So we'll continue to use this technology. But as importantly as that, I'm looking at the moment around the feasibility of acquiring this technology ourselves and equipping some of Hertfordshire's own vans so we can make regular use of this kind of week in, week out, as opposed to at key events. So both of those things are being really actively pursued.
Thank you very much, and I welcome that, and I think it is a really positive thing to see Hertfordshire doing as part of that focus on catching offenders. So thank you for the work the team's done on that.
Thank you.
I'm going to move on to some questions about response times, something we've looked at before. The Home Secretary recently announced that she is going to be setting a national target of 15-minute response to an emergency call in urban areas, 20 minutes in rural areas. So I wanted to just get an update on how the constabulary is currently performing ahead of any national target being introduced, because certainly when we last looked at the data, it was a pretty positive picture.
Yes, thank you. So Hertfordshire Constabulary currently has one target for all emergency response, irrespective of whether it's urban or rural, is 15 minutes. And our current performance is against that threshold of 15 minutes. The year to date, we're making 78% of emergency responses within that time. The overwhelming majority we make within 15 minutes, but the average is 78%. Now, I'd like us to do better than that. We have an internal ambition to be at 85% or higher, and we're working really hard to achieve that. But clearly, if a new national target around rural communities comes in of 20 minutes, our compliance with that would increase based on where we are now. We're measuring ourselves against a 15-minute across the whole of the county.
Thank you for that. And I suppose the sort of question following on from that is whether you envisage any changes needing to be made to how the constabulary organises response policing in light of that target, and equally the rural areas don't actually see a kind of softening of response times because the target nationally is a little bit slower than what the constabulary is currently aiming for. Yeah,
and this is a really important question, Commissioner. So we're categoric that there'll be no movement of resources or kind of gaming of where we put people depending on differential response targets. It's really, really important that all communities in Hertfordshire, including our rural communities, get the right response. So we will deploy our people and our cars according to the demand and the risk we see. We will not deploy it to meet targets. We will do the right thing to get the right response on the right occasion. And those incidents are assessed every single time they come in by the fantastic men and women who work in the control room above us now. And we will always remain focused on doing the right thing, not meeting a target. But it's really important that we do aspire to get there as quickly as we possibly can.
Thank you. I'd certainly agree with that. And so what will you be doing in terms of ensuring that we don't end up with kind of any unintended or perverse consequences from that target, given people obviously want to hit targets, but just making sure that doesn't end up with slightly odd things happening, and as you say, the response the public get is the one that they need ultimately.
So the team here at the control room absolutely have kind of a really clear process, as I've said, around making sure we do the right thing, not to meet a target just for the target's sake. So we have something called Dispatch Right, and we use mapping technology to say what is the closest vehicle that's available to go to that incident, or needs to be deployed from its current piece of work because that's less important than the piece of work it needs to go to. So we get that response right. So through that kind of literally incident by incident, day by day, week by week mapping of our responses, we will be able to make sure there are no unintended consequences. So when we look back, we can say, oh, has our net response time to rural communities gone down because we're being pulled into urban areas? We would absolutely see it. So we would see things we don't want to happen if they start to happen.
Okay, thank you very much. I'm sure it's something we'll come back to and keep an eye on. And equally, ensuring that the officers are kept safe in doing those responses.
Absolutely.
As well, in terms of driving safely and getting safely to incidents is really important, as well as the service of the public.
Correct. Absolutely.
I'm going to move on to the Online Safety Act that has introduced a range of new offences around online abuse and online harms. I wanted to just understand what the impact of that legislation and new offences coming in has had on the constabulary and how it's been responded to.
Thank you. So the Online Safety Act introduced effectively 6 broad new categories of crime. I won't go through the kind of the detail of these, but 2 of them relate effectively to false or threatening communications. There's a new crime relating to showing flashing images, and I don't mean flashing as in indecent images, but images that are designed to induce people to have some kind of epileptic fit or something similar to that. An offence around encouraging or assisting others to self-harm, and then 2 final new crimes in relation to sending threatening or indecent images, nude photos and films, those sorts of things. The net impact of this has been about 1,000 new crimes that we've recorded since this happened that we wouldn't have otherwise recorded because there is now new legislation. A significant amount of work, in particular looking around some of the complexity around that new offence category of encouraging others to cause self-harm. And there are 3 live investigations into that which are fairly complex and far-reaching and indeed go outside the boundaries of this country. So there's some fairly complex work in relation to that. And as I've said, about 1,000 new investigations. Largely those new investigations fall into the area of sending photos or images of an indecent or nude nature. Which obviously is more work for police to do, and important work. And that work can be from kind of adult against child offending, of that nature, of the most serious end of the spectrum, through to sometimes on occasion, sadly, children experimenting and sharing images with each other, which they shouldn't do. And obviously the constabulary has to take a thoughtful but different approach to some of those cases. So there's lots of new work happening here, both in the criminal justice space and in the safeguarding space driven by this.
Thank you. That's useful to understand. And in terms of those kind of investigations and the offences that have been recorded, how many of those have gone through the criminal justice system? What kind of outcomes have there been?
Not many, Commissioner, and in terms of outcomes, I'd probably broadly say not enough. So in total, since the legislation came into place, there have been 3,800 crimes recorded across those 6 categories, and about 1,000 of those wouldn't have been recorded had it not been for the new legislation. About 2,800 would have been recorded as other redacted legislation. It's about 1,000 new pieces of work. Of those 3,800 crimes, though, 123 were subject of a formal charge. 84 more were subject of a caution or an out-of-court disposal, and 37 were subject of diversionary work. However, 1,750, there is an offender known, and either no formal outcome has been pursued or the investigation is ongoing. So I think we definitely have work to do to increase the number of outcomes, be that through charges, be that through cautions, or be that through diversionary work and education in this space, in particular where there are threatening or false communications and where images are being exchanged, perhaps most acutely between young children. So not enough, and we have work to do.
Thank you. And is your view that there are kind of particular challenges around the legislation around getting those into positive outcomes, or is that just around it being new and work to be done to get that kind of progress going around some of those new offences?
I think there's a bit of the legislation is new, and there's something about training and familiarity and confidence of my officers and staff to know how to interpret it and how they can do the right thing. There is also, I think, something really important around how Hertfordshire Constabulary works in the partnership space, maybe with schools, maybe with children's social care, to make the sensible decisions around, let's just use the example where two school children maybe exchange images they shouldn't be exchanging, that's now a crime. Getting really confident and quick and decisive to say, this is not a case we want to take to court for all these reasons, but here is the right out-of-court disposal method that's a formal outcome that I don't think we've been properly recording. I think the work has been happening, but we haven't been always recording that as an outcome that we can then count that great work that's happened. So I think we need to professionalise and sharpen up on how we're doing some of that work.
Thank you, that makes sense. And you touched a bit there around kind of officers getting your understanding and gaining experience with new piece of legislation. What training has the Constabulary put in place to support officers and staff with identifying, recording and investigating these new offences?
So last year guidance was issued to all officers and staff around the Constabulary about the new legislation and what their powers were and weren't, and therefore what they should be doing about it. As a result of my assessment of where we are now, we'll be putting in place further follow-up training in the coming months to really refresh that and ensure the right focus and attention is given to solving more of this, because we can and we should be in the right way. And we're also literally, I think I've spoken about before, developing a tool in our control room where crimes are recorded, so it can really quickly and really accurately identify this, and I'm confident we can, but through use of technology, really streamline how we kind of get this quickly to the officers with a really clear action plan about what they should do next.
Thank you. And you referred to some of the sort of partnership and safeguarding work around that, and I'd be interested to understand what work the Constabulary's undertaken or plans to undertake around preventative and educational work, and given the example a couple of times of children sharing indecent images, a lot of which should be preventable, and kind of what's the Constabulary doing in that space in partnership with schools, other agencies and so on? So
as you know, Commissioner, we have officers and staff who are embedded in or work really closely with our colleagues in the education sector. I think we really do need to do more in that space, though, specifically on this issue. So my plans are that we redouble our efforts to ensure that we get a really clear programme in every school, so every head teacher has confidence that this is how Hertfordshire Constabulary will deal with this in a really thoughtful way. Confidence for children and or parents to come forward where there are concerns, and there are a number of strategic partnership forums in the county where we come together and think about community safety, think about harm to children, and I think this is one of the areas where, through those partnership leaders coming together, we should and will keep a really close eye on, because we can see this is happening, and we know we need to be doing more to make sure we get the interaction and intervention right.
Thank you. I think that's absolutely right. Thank you. It's useful to understand, because it's new bit of legislation and often kind of gets commented in the national debate and conversation in a fairly one-dimensional way, but it's interesting to understand some of those kind of implications for policing and some of those areas where offences are being occurring in reality in Hertfordshire. Thank you. I'm going to move on to the Victims Code of Practice, which sets out a number of rights that victims have, some of which apply particularly to policing, others which apply more to other parts of the criminal justice system, and their rights such as around being kept updated about the progress of an investigation and a case and so on. And I wanted to just get an update really around the Constabulary's performance against those rights, and perhaps I could ask for 2025, how the constabulary performed around the Victims Code of Practice.
Thank you. The constabulary is doing well in this area, Commissioner, I'm pleased to say, and has put an awful lot of effort into it, and we're seeing measurable, quantifiable improvements. So some of the key metrics around the rights that victims has, as set out in the Victims Codes of Practice, to have your crime recorded quickly, within 24 hours. So in January this year, we recorded 88% of crimes within 24 hours. By December, that had improved to 94% within 24 hours. And across the year, that's an average of 91%. Not complacent. I want it to be closer to 100%, but we're improving getting crime on quickly. There is also a right for a victim to be given practical advice and referred for victim support. We now have automated and improved our messages so that all victims are getting that kind of key information they need when they report a crime, and we're seeing an increase in referrals, resulting in 9% more victims taking up support from the various victim groups that are out there designed to help. So we're seeing some positive uplift there, and when you start to break that down into numbers, in 2024, there were 3,215 victims who were supported by our Catch 22, one of our key victim support offerings, and that had increased to nearly 3,600 this year. So about 400 more people getting direct support. There's lots and lots of victims code rights. There's another one to have your case reviewed if you're not happy. And in 2025, we saw a record number of victims, CK victims right to review, and that was worked through. That was up to 192 from 158 in 2024 and 104 the year before. So the highest on record of victims reviewing their case as per their right. And equally, and then I'll stop throwing some numbers at you, the criminal injuries compensation ability for victims to claim again last year was at its highest level of support offered, with 1,621 victims having a criminal injuries application submitted, the highest again on record. So the constabulary's put an awful lot of effort rightly into making sure victims get the support they need as set out in the Code of Practice.
Thank you, and it's reassuring to hear those increases and improvement in performance there. Thank you, because there's real victims of crime kind of at the end of each of those statistics, as you say. One of the things that comes up very often with victims is around the kind of updates that they get during the course of the investigation, and often victims have a very good experience in terms of the number of updates they get and the regularity of them, sometimes less so. So what's the constabulary been doing to ensure that victims are getting timely updates at each stage of the case progressing?
Thank you. Well, we have a victim witness care unit whose job it is to do exactly as you've said, for all the obvious reasons why it's important. So that victim and witness care unit make initial contact with victims prior to any court cases and following charge, so they understand what process may lay ahead, and works with victims and witnesses to manage expectations around timescales, which is really important. They then stay in touch with that victim, giving updates around future court dates, any bail conditions that may have been imposed on offenders, and they stay in touch through telephone, letter, whatever works for that particular person. And as the court case comes, they support them through that court case. So there's that kind of cradle to grave approach, really, to help victims and witnesses through the process. And one of the reasons this is important, number one, victims need that support. Number two, they need to feel, because it's an emotional, difficult and traumatic time. But sadly, that takes longer than we would like sometimes for offenders to be taken through the court process. So that support is key and will remain in place.
Thank you. And we know that the delays kind of elsewhere in the criminal justice system are increasing the amount of time that victims are waiting. What impact is that having on the constabulary support for victims and witnesses, and how is the constabulary seeking to manage that kind of increasing caseload being held for longer during that criminal justice system journey?
Well, there is the first impact. We've got more victims waiting for justice through the court system, making the work of our victim and witness care unit all the more important, and they are all the busier. There are currently 2,250 cases awaiting trial in Hertfordshire, either at Magistrates Court or Crown Court. The oldest case that I'm aware of goes back to 2021. But most cases are 2024 and 2025, but there is a significant backlog. The reasons for that are, to be honest, many and varied, Commissioner. Some of that is about the pace of police investigations and the complexity of investigations, where we need to gather and download digital evidence off phones and computers. But mostly the benefits, the limitations and the challenges we've got around timeliness are out of our control. It's capacity of other agencies like the Crown Prosecution Service or the court system to hear cases, and ultimately this has been it is a national challenge for government, the Home Office, the Ministry of Justice to work through and fix. It is a real challenge at the moment. There are national pieces of work looking at how we can deal with justice through the court system faster, how we can create capacity in prisons to allow the consequence of some of those cases to happen. But it's a particularly challenging issue at the moment. All I can say is that from a policing perspective, we will continue to focus on what we need to focus on: targeting criminals, arresting more criminals and solving more crime, working really, really carefully with the CPS to take people through the criminal justice system and supporting victims up until that stage. But it's too slow at the moment and it needs to improve.
The Victims in Prisons Act a couple of years ago widened the definition of a victim of crime, brought kind of more people into scope of who might have been affected by a crime. How's that change impacted the work that the constabulary does with victims more broadly?
The answer is not really too much, because we were ahead of this. So the new Act says a victim is defined as someone who's suffered direct harm because of criminal conduct, has seen, heard or otherwise experienced the effect of criminal conduct, and some other categories, which are slightly broader. But Hertfordshire was already in that place through to kind of really sensible previous decision making and investment, and we, one of the absolute kind of jewels in our crown is our victim care support, and we've got a dedicated victim service team who look after victims when a crime has happened, providing immediate support, going through what they need and providing relevant ongoing referrals. We've spoken about some of that. We've got a dedicated fraud hub working with victims who are subject of fraud and similar complex scams. Again, we've got a dedicated domestic violence safeguarding hub working with victims of domestic abuse, making sure that the multi-agency safeguarding wraparound is in place. And as of course I've referred to, we've got our Catch-22 charity as well, again working with victims to make sure that they are well supported. So the change in legislation, because we were ahead of it, has seen little impact, but we are absolutely compliant with that new legislation and doing everything we can to support victims.
Great, thank you very much. That's useful, thank you. I'm going to move on to the next agenda item, which is disclosure and barring service checks, which is one that appears in the inbox every so often from a Hertfordshire resident, and the police have a role but aren't fully responsible for the full system of a DBS check, which someone might need because they're working with vulnerable adults or individuals, alongside many other reasons. Perhaps I could just ask if you could explain what role the constabulary does have in that DBS check and kind of what information needs to go into that process that ultimately a different agency is responsible for.
Thank you. So the DBS disclosure and barring service certificate is categorised in three levels: basic, standard or enhanced. For basic and standard, the only role the police play is where an individual believes some information recorded about them is wrong. and we review the information and correct if not. So we have very little beyond that in relation to beyond for basic and standards. But for enhanced checks, we do a police intelligence search. So for an enhanced check might be for someone who's required to work with vulnerable people or children, as a good example, and that's really where the bulk of the police interaction with the DBS service comes into place for those riskier checks.
Thank you. And what's the constabulary's current performance and timeliness in terms of that role of providing those kind of responses?
Thank you. Not as quick and as efficient as I would like it to be. The service ambition we have here is to turn around an application where the police needs to do some work within 12 days. So that's quite a significant ambition. And Hertfordshire, with 9 other forces, is not meeting that by too far. So to put that into context, as of the middle of last month, in Hertfordshire there were 5,500 cases that were outside that kind of service ambition of 12 days, and it was taking us on average 51 days to process the applications. Some others were doing worse than that, but I don't take any comfort from that. So we have work to do. The reasons behind that are, as you would expect, many and varied. There are some vacancies in the team which are being addressed and recruited to, and there were some issues of absence last year out of our control that affected some of the core performance. But with a plan to recruit and a plan to use some targeted overtime to work into the backlog, we are starting to see some modest improvements in the processing timescales. As I said, as of January, it was on average of 51 days. Since we've focused on this, from that period, the processing time is now down to an average of 32 days, but clearly not within the 12-day ambition. So we have work to do, Commissioner, to bring down the backlog and increase the pace of processing.
Thank you for that update. And what sort of timescale are you anticipating that it might be possible to get that closer to the target, or is that a less certain position at the moment, and it's a case of trying to drive it down but making sure it's not getting any worse, certainly?
It's the latter at the moment. So I have a monthly monitoring process in place. I'm not able yet to forecast how long that will take to get it to a position where I'll be happier with it. My ambition at the moment, though, is through that monthly tracking to see steady improvements in the right direction. To draw the comfort or otherwise that we've got a plan that's starting to work through that training, that recruitment, or indeed that targeted use of additional monies to process things a little bit quicker.
Okay, lovely, thank you. And I suppose the supplementary to that is there a system in place to understand where there might be particularly urgent needs for a check? So, someone applying for a job in a school, for example, could be at risk of losing the job if the check doesn't come through in a relatively quick period of time, whereas other checks might be important but for something perhaps less time critical or sensitive for an individual. Does that team have a way of kind of triaging those and prioritising according to need?
There is an escalation process available for individuals who are waiting for a DBS check to be completed, whereby, as I understand, after 28 days, if there is a financial hardship likely to result of not having that answer, my job offer is going to be withdrawn, for example, that can be escalated through the disclosure and barring service, who will pass that on to the police, and then we have a service commitment, I think, of 5 days to turn that round where that escalation has happened by the individual with that particular concern.
Thank you. And are you confident that 5-day response after that escalation is then largely being achieved?
Yes.
Thank you very much for that update, and clearly sounds like some work being done there to address that. And I'm sure we'll come back to that in a future meeting, no doubt, to keep an eye on how that is going. Thank you. That brings us to the end of today's agenda. I hope members of the public have found the meeting useful, and Chief Constable, thank you very much.
Thank you.